Okay, well, look, let's get started. So I just wanted to thank you for logging on today. I know it's a difficult time. So a little bit of background about myself. I am a chartered accountant and business advisor. I split across our different offices. We've got 3 different offices, the Sunshine Coast at Moffat Beach, Brendale, and also a satellite office in Brisbane City. I've been doing this for about 25 plus years now. And I've moved away from the traditional, financial statements, tax returns that you normally associate with accountants to focus on the advisory work and follow my passion, which is working with clients and businesses and educating them on what they need to do to grow, to improve their profitability, to manage that growth so that it's profitable and that it's cash flow, that the cash flow impact is monitored. And to work with you to put in place steps and actions and strategies to help you achieve just that. So that's a little bit about my background. As I said, we have 3 different offices. So we are a lot more than what people would consider to be the stereotypical accountant that does financial statements and tax returns. So some of the work that I do with clients, I do a lot of work around performance analysis, strategic planning, profit improvement, managing growth, financial literacy, looking at different funding sources. So I do a lot of work in the grant space, of which there's not a lot around at the moment, particularly from a Queensland perspective. There is something, you mentioned you manufacture though, Jackie. Do you mind me while no one else is here?
No, we don't manufacture, we're a retailer. So
okay, right.
We get our awnings made in Brisbane, we get our shutters made in, we've got both. We've got Australian made and China.
Right.
And we get our internal blinds made in Melbourne.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that answers that then, because I was going to say there is a good grant program that's available for manufacturers if you've turnovers over 1.5 million and you've been trading for more than 3 years, but it doesn't sound like you'd fit that space anyway.
No, we're retail.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things that we have been involved in. And one of the reasons why I love doing these webinars is it's really great for me to just get feedback from business owners like yourselves and try and work out ways that we can actually support you. So the first thing that I do want to say is, and I know you made the comment that it's very difficult to plan at the moment, but I actually think it's crucial that businesses actually plan for what's going on. So yes, sounds like you, Jackie, have already considered all the different key challenges that you're facing. And obviously the biggest one is no revenue and cash flow. But sometimes what I'm finding is that for a lot of my clients that it has actually also opened opportunities, particularly for those businesses that are able to what we call pivot and capitalize on some of those new opportunities. So it's a great way for you to start thinking about different products or services you can actually be operating. So the first thing that I always do with clients is we try and map out a plan. So what does it look like now? What are the key issues are? Where do you want it to be? Now, the where becomes very difficult in a time like now. So what I would suggest that all businesses be looking at is developing some what we call disaster scenario plans for the next 6 months to 12-month period. And then look at the mild impact, look at a medium impact, and then look at the worst case scenario of where you can end up, which it sounds like you're already in, Jackie. So once you're doing that, that means digging down into the detailed strategies and looking at how you're going to manage that cash flow. What are the revenue sources? How can you engage with your stakeholders to actually remind them that you're still open for business and do a bit of a marketing push to remind people? And I saw, Jackie, I had a quick look at your website that you've actually put on your website, which is fantastic. On your front page, I saw a sign that came up and said, we're still open for business, still taking orders, which is great.
We did that. We got the web guys to do that as a pop-up. As soon as you go into the website, because a lot of people can't tell from people's websites whether they're still trading or not. That's
right.
And we put it on the Facebook page as well, and we completed that Queensland Health Infection Control thing certificate. So we've kind of, and I mean, we did literally go into meltdown for the first 2 weeks. We just were sitting back like stunned mullets going, what do we do? And then I snapped out of that and just tried to do everything I could.
And you're right. The first, we're still in the survival phase at the moment, but we're just trying to work our way through the amount of information that's out there. So just keep on top of it. And if you've got any specific questions, talk to your accountants about it, or worst case scenario, I'm happy if you email me directly if you've got any queries that after today. So one of the things that we wanted to talk to about today was, what can we look at doing to improve our profitability just to get through this? And when you go through some sort of profit improvement process, there's 3 key stages of that process, which I'll talk about in a moment. I want to focus some time today on actually how to do a waste audit in your business, because a lot of time, you know, accountants or business owners will focus on, well, where can I cut costs? And that's one way of doing a profit improvement strategy. Or how can I grow, you know, sales? Yes, you've got your 3 profit drivers, which I will also refer to as we go throughout. However, when you focus on cost cutting or increasing sales, you don't remove some of the inefficiencies that exist within the business. So one of the things that I like to do with clients is actually take them through a waste audit. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of how to do that. And I've already emailed through some tools so that after today's session, you can actually go through and actually start doing that waste audit on your own business to work out 3 or 4 key strategies or 3 or 4 key areas that you can focus on right now to actually try and minimize that waste, which will lead to an increased profitability. So that's the purpose of today's session. So in any type of business improvement process, there's 3 key stages. And it tends to be a long-term process. So at the moment, we are going to be focusing on stages 1, and in particular stage 2 I'll be talking about today. But bear in mind that generally this is a process that should be repeated on at least an annual or by every second year basis throughout your business. So the first stage of a business improvement process is making sure that you have the right products, the right product mix, the right type of clients that you're selling to and the right location for those clients, that your staff have the right skill sets to be able to do what you need them to do, and most importantly, that you've got your pricing set accurately. It's surprising to me when I start working with a lot of clients, particularly if they are in the manufacturing space, how often perhaps their pricing isn't as accurate as it should be to cover a lot of the costs that are associated with it. So that's the first stage, which is the stage that you can see. It's the visible components of your business. Then we move into the invisible areas of your business improvement areas. And the second stage is waste. And that's where there is inefficiencies that are existing within your business that are costing you money and reducing your profitability. So we'll look at what those 7 key waste areas are as we go through today. And then underpinning all of this is your long-term strategy and vision. So this is the culture that you're setting for your organization. So what is the culture that you need, and what type of staff do you need within that culture to make this process actually successful? So in terms of waste, it's interesting that there's been quite a bit of studies done on inefficiencies in business units across a whole range of different types of business industries. So both manufacturing, service, wholesale, retail markets, and also professional service firms. And they've shown that up to as much as 30% of the operating costs of a business can be attributable to potentially inefficiencies and waste. So one of the things we're going to look at today is, how do you actually go about reducing that waste? And there's a 5-step process that you should be looking at repeating on an annual basis. So today I'm going to teach you step 1, and we'll touch on the other steps. But step 1 is all about, the very first thing you need to do is you need to go through a waste audit process on your businesses. Once that's done, you identify your 3 or 4 key strategies and you prioritize those strategies, break them down into detailed action items with allocated responsibilities and timeframes, and actually work on reducing that waste areas. You put your team in place because not all staff will have the right skill set to be able to undertake some of those improvements and priority action items that are needed to be done. And then most importantly, you've got to measure it. So if you don't put in place either financial and or operating performance measures, and usually you need to have a combination of both to actually track how the business is going throughout this waste reduction process, it becomes a little bit of a waste of time because you don't know if you're succeeding or not until 12 months down the track. So it's really important that you've got those measurement mechanisms in place to be able to track how things are going throughout this process. And then step 5 is you want to be developing that culture of innovation and repeating this waste audit methodology on an annual basis. So I would love to say that I invented it, but I didn't. This has actually come out of a lot of research that was originally started by Tochi Ono, who was the production engineer at Toyota. So Toyota production facilities, when it came out in Japan, was the leading example of what we now call lean manufacturing. So whilst that might be a manufacturing base that it came out of, it is applicable to all different types of industries. And as I give you some examples of waste areas in specific industries, you'll understand how we apply it across other industries. So the most important thing is to start looking at what are the 7 wastes and how could they apply to your particular business. So the first waste area is basically where you do something in excess of what's required. So these are things like if you're over purchasing. Usually if you have staff overtime, particularly if you've got staff doing overtime on a regular basis, there's an example there of inefficiency. So either why are they doing, you need to look at why are they doing the overtime, or is there a cheaper way that you can actually be doing things so that you can reduce that overtime or reduce the time and the processes that are involved that are generating that overtime. The other thing is product range, and I'll touch on this when we get to the inventory, unnecessary inventory component, but a lot of businesses have a lot more products than they actually sell. And if you think about one of the easiest ways to make money as a business owner is to identify what your most profitable products are, as in your margins, and sell more of those. So the ones where you have really low margins, unless it's significantly high turnover, then maybe that's an area that you might want to consider reducing some of your product range. Another area where, particularly for service industries and maybe even retail industries such as yourself, Jackie, is over-servicing. So for example, I'll give you an example from my perspective. So I might put a new client on for a fee coach, and we might do a strategic planning session and some cash flows to look at how things are going to track for the next 12 months, and we'll put in place some financial KPIs. Sometimes as part of that and as a desire to help clients, you might overstep that mark and start thinking, well, the zero file's a mess, so we might spend some extra hours cleaning that up. Now, I can't bill for that, because that's outside the scope of our service agreement. So in that situation, that would be an example of me as a professional service person over-servicing, which is waste, which is performing services that I may not get paid for, or probably won't get paid for. And I think if you think about it from a retail perspective, particularly if you're doing installations and things like that, the more difficult the installation, the more time. So unless you've got that costed right, that can potentially be an area of over-servicing as well. So that's the first waste area. The second waste area is waiting. So wherever you have a process or a job that flows throughout your business, as you go through the different stages of that job, anywhere where waiting occurs is a potential waste area, because the longer it takes to get that job completed, the longer it takes for you to actually invoice, which means the longer it takes for you to actually get paid. So we see this a lot in manufacturing, or even people in the retail space, where you have production holdups that reduce the delivery of the finished good, or you've got material supplies that are holding up the ability to produce that particular good, or if you're waiting for subcontractors, such as if you've got a business that might engage subcontractors to perform work for you, and those subcontractors have committed elsewhere or they're not managing their time correctly, and you're waiting for them to come and do jobs, again, it's another area of waste. Another one that we see a lot is where customers are waiting for a response or they're waiting for delivery of goods. So quite often you might go through a process if you're selling any type of service or good, where a customer will ask you a question. It might be quite difficult. There might be a technical area. The longer you take to respond to that customer and to actually get that sale finalised, again, it's another area of waste. And one we see a lot of too, and which we're guilty of just like other businesses, is when you're waiting for management decisions, particularly if you've got multiple people in management roles. You know, I work with a lot of larger clients, for example, that might have offices in Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, New South Wales, Victoria, etc. And when you're trying to get consensus on an idea or information to prepare cash flows and issue fees and things, it can lead to inefficiency, which again leads to waste. Another step is transport. So wherever there is transport between stages in a process, there's possibility for waste. So this is looking at both the internal transport areas and export. So any external, I should say. So any internal and external movement of people or goods or information flow can again lead to pockets of inefficiencies. So this can occur where you have either excessive material handling, so where you've got people you know, doing a similar thing over and over again that they may only have needed to do once, which is similar to pick up put time issues, which I'll talk about in a moment. Things such as doing multiple delivery runs. So I have a lot of clients that I would start working with that had the belief that as soon as a job was done, it had to be sent to a client. That's great, but what about we just do one delivery run per day? Instead of doing 3 or 4, let's just do 1, because that will reduce your costs. It's going to reduce the inefficiency from your business perspective. And usually most of your clients, unless it's critical or urgent, will be prepared to wait until the end of the day for that delivery run. The other thing that we look at is layout. So the layout of both your factory, your store, your office. So the more time you have to spend setting up stock or transferring stock from one area to another, again, is an example of potential waste. And a big one for me, and potentially for you, Gillian, and also for you, Jackie, is travel. So that's taken out of our hands at the moment. And I must say, it's one of the benefits that I'm actually experiencing, because quite often when I travel across the different offices and I'm constantly going out to see clients, you can imagine that commuting time sucks up a lot of hours, and there's no fees associated with that from our perspective. So that travel time is downtime and wastage and inefficiency from our perspective. So we have started even before coronavirus, and Gillian, it was interesting to hear you say before Jackie came on how you'd started the paperless process. The next extension is to phase that travel time out and move to more meetings with clients through Zoom, through Teams, which is brilliant, and through a number of other different platforms, because I'm finding that has been a great time saver throughout this whole process. And it might be difficult to wean clients off that face-to-face, and it's not always possible, particularly where you've got to go out to client homes or whatnot, or businesses to actually quote for installation and things. However, if you can organise the run so that you're minimising the distance between, that can save you time, which saves you money. And the other thing is to think about the method of transport that you use. So a lot of people will find a courier company and stick with that courier company. I always encourage people, let's shop around. Let's see who's the best courier company. Let's look at, well, is it cheaper for us, depending on how many runs we're doing and whatnot, to actually have our own small truck and do our own delivery, or is it still cheaper to outsource? So have a think about how you're actually transporting your goods to their customer, or how you're receiving the goods in the first place. And I'll give you an example. So one of my clients was, or still is an online store, and they have a lot of stock coming from overseas, also from within Australia. And we looked at the cycles of their business and worked out, well, when do particular items of stock sell? Is there a particular time of year? And we managed to identify, you know, some peaks and troughs for certain stock lines. And we worked out that we would save a considerable amount of money for those goods that were coming imported from overseas if we got them here via ship rather than via plane. So now we are trying to consider that and trying to do a bit of pre-planning to see if we can do that more regularly to significantly reduce some of the air freight costs that we were having. It's not always possible, but the point is that you need to be looking at these sort of things to figure out where potential savings can be made. The next area of waste is in what we call inappropriate processing. So this is something that I see a lot of, and it's usually associated with staff. So using the wrong staff for that, or the wrong type of person for that particular job, or even the wrong tool for those of you who are you know, in that manufacturing or actually building things space. So it's things like having the wrong staff role fit. So it's really important as employers that we were aware of all of the different skill sets that our staff have. Excuse me. And that we're mapping those skill sets to the appropriate roles, so that we've got the people with the appropriate skills that we need performing the right role. And another example that I see a lot of in this area is where you've got sales staff that end up doing admin jobs. Sales staff focus should be on business development and selling. It shouldn't be about processing paperwork, entering orders, and issuing invoices. Though you should have your processes and procedures set up for much cheaper admin staff to be doing it, or even better, have those processes automated to remove that staff requirement altogether. So using the wrong person for the job is something that we do see a lot of. The other thing is outdated equipment. So I know that that might sometimes involve a capital expenditure, and particularly at the moment, even though the government has issued a lot of incentives for people to spend money with the increase in the instant asset write-off threshold to 150,000, at the moment it's probably not feasible. However, down the track, when we get to the other side of this, by going through this process, where you've identified that you potentially have some outdated equipment, or you need to upgrade some of your facilities and things, you need to be thinking about, yes, it's a capital expenditure, but what are the potential savings, and what's the break-even point of when that will actually start saving me money. So you need to be thinking about the long term as well when you're going through this process. Lack of documented systems and procedures I see a lot of, which means that where you do have staff that are either part-time, or you're job sharing, or you've got staff turnover, or you're in situations like we are and you're forced to work remotely, if something happens and you don't have those processes and procedures in right, it results in a lot of inefficiency. So a lot of wasted time from a staff perspective, a lot of pick up and put down time from staff's perspective. So it's really important that businesses have documented systems and procedures, and that all staff are aware of what they are and where they're saved and how they actually access them. And that should be forming part of any induction process that you're going through with any new staff members as well. So step 5 in the waste area, the 5th area of waste is around unnecessary inventory. So one of the things that I think we need to remember is the more stock levels you have, the more cash you have tied up. So anything that you have purchased or produced or developed or that is sitting on your floor that you haven't sold is potential waste area. And the longer it's unsold, the harder it is to sell, the more likely you are to have to discount it. So we need to be looking at things like product range here. So make sure that you don't have lines of really slow moving stock. I see a lot of examples of clients where they think they have to be the one-stop shop and supply absolutely everything that a client might need. That's not always in the best interests of your business, because if you have a lot of stock that's not turned over regularly, it costs you money. And 9 times out of 10, you'll have to significantly discount that because it'll age, because it won't be the newest thing, and you'll actually lose money. So be mindful of slow turning or stock with low stock turnover amounts. The other thing to think about is your finished goods, your stock levels. So how often is your stock turning over a year? Depending on the type of business will determine how often it should be turning over. However, you know, it's a figure that you all need to be familiar with and comfortable with, and making sure that you don't have that stock level too high sitting within your business. Unnecessary motions is the next area. So this is about time management and the ergonomics that go with that. So what I see a lot of, and what, you know, we're as guilty as this as anybody else, is that stop-start mentality. So where you might start a job and you get to a stage in that particular job and you think, oh, hang on a minute, I still need this. So you'll have to go back to the client and request that particular information. The job gets put down, and it might be a week or 2 later that the client might get back to you, and then you pick it up again. So the more times you stop, start, pick up, put down jobs, the more inefficiency, the more waste you are creating. Particularly relevant where you've got staff leaving on holidays, or staff leaving, or your job sharing, or whatever. So whatever we can do to minimize that stop, start, pick up, put down, we need to be doing. And I'll give you an example of what we do in our firm. So to stop that happening, we try to make sure before we start any client's compliance work. So these are your financial statements, your tax returns, your tax compliance, your cash flow forecasts, all of that type of thing. Before we start all that, we will have a list that we will provide to the client and say, this is what we need. We do not start the job until all of that information has been provided by the client. And the reason for that is, the more times we have to pick up a job and remember where you were at the time before, remember what needs to happen, then a change might come in based on a piece of information you have, which might affect other items on financial statements, the more waste there is in that job. We can't charge any more for that job. So basically, if we don't manage that pick up, put down, we can have the potential to lose money. So it's really important that you identify on a job before you start that you have all of the necessary information and resources to be able to complete that job to stop that pick up, put down time. Another area of unnecessary motions here is stock picking that we see a lot of. So not having those stock picking procedures in place and it not happening quickly enough to be able to deliver orders, to be able to invoice. And also think about factory layout here and even office layout. So I'll give you an example. We have clients that might have offices at one end of the factory upstairs in a little mezzanine level. The customer area will be in the reception area out the front. And you've got staff constantly walking through the factory floor between admin and between the office area up the top. So that layout can be conducive to a whole heap of wasted time if you're constantly running up and down that factory floor every day, up and down stairs, and also exposes potential risks for WH&S incidences. So you need to be thinking about the factory layout, the office layout, to minimize the time spent getting work from one particular area to another. And then finally, the last area of waste is where you have potential rework occurring, or defects that are occurring, or any sort of error that results in rework or double handling. Usually we see these coming from poor communication. So either poor instructions from the person that's requesting the job, poor documentation that supports that. Sometimes it can be poor workmanship. You know, if you've got somebody that's producing something and they're having a bad day or whatever, sometimes it can result from that. It can result from computer input errors. I mean, I have one client that produces high-grade adhesives that are used in construction and high-end construction. So they ran a whole batch of adhesive through their production run and put in the wrong colour, which produced the wrong coloured grout, which was a completely different colour to what the client actually wanted. And if you think about, if you're building a massive high-rise building, the amount of grout that had to be remade was a massive example of waste, and it's simply come from somebody not being on their game, not having their work double checked, and putting the wrong cut dye through the process. So you need to be thinking about what procedures you've got in place to stop that rework from actually occurring in the first place. So they are the 7 waste areas. Now there's lots of other examples. I've just tried to pick out some of the key examples of where waste occurs in the majority of businesses. Now that you've got that and you've had a bit of a think about those 7 areas, what I would like you to do after this webinar is to use the worksheet that I have provided to do your own waste audit. And I'll tell you which worksheet you want and how to do it. So it's this worksheet here. It's the blue one that would have come through, and it has the 7 waste areas listed down, and it has costs, and it has a rating scale. So if you want to pull that document up, I'll talk you through how you actually go about this actual completion of a waste audit. So the first thing that you all need to do is, now that you've got a little bit of information on the 7 key waste areas, is you need to think of at least 3 areas, if you can, for each of those 7 headings where potential waste or inefficiency might sit within your business. Even if you can only get 1, it's better than nothing. So go through those 7 areas, and in each of the blue boxes, I'd like you to list, if you can, 3. So 3 examples of where you might be overproducing, 3 examples where you might be having issues around waiting for delivery, waiting for stock, waiting for materials, waiting to get back to customers and things. And try and come up with 3 for each of the different waste areas. Once you've done that, the second step is the hardest step. So the second step is you try and work out an estimate, and it is only an estimate, of how much you think that is costing you every year. So you pick a period. I like to do a 12-month period because it's easy to try and get people to think about it, and it's easy to track information through your accounting systems over a 12-month period. So think about, you know, some of the costs that might be associated with that particular area, and it might be some of the costs associated with staff salaries. You know, if you've got staff sitting down idle, if you've got staff that aren't as productive as they should be and not meeting their targets. If you've got overtime costs, how much overtime are you paying? If you're constantly repairing equipment, what is that costing you? If your aging equipment is costing you money in terms of excessive energy bills, that might be an example that you could actually put a cost around. Admin costs, if you've got too much office space, that's a cost that you could look at getting rid of. So if you can, try and estimate a dollar value. I've had some people try and do this on their own, and they've just come back and said, "Oh, that's too hard. I don't know how to do that. I know you know how to do it, but for me, I find it quite difficult. And I say to them, at least if you can't do that, step one, identify potential waste areas and then rate them in terms of how much you think it's going to cost on a high, medium and low cost basis. So do you think it's costing you a lot of money? It'd be high. If it's not a lot of money, it'd be low. If you're not real sure, but somewhere between the two, you'd rate it as medium. But it's really important that you identify where those high cost waste areas are and what are the lower ones. Then we want to rate, so step 3 is we rate the ease of removal for each of those issues we've identified. So if it's hard, and you rated it out of 10, so from 1 to 10. So if it's hard to remove and you really don't know how to fix that problem, you give it a 1. So 1 is really hard to remove, don't know where to start. A 10 is, oh, that's easy. I know how I can fix that. I'm going to give it a 10. And most fall somewhere between those two figures. So you rate it. Then you have to pick where you're going to focus. So usually what I say to clients is you start with the ones that are the easiest to remove, that have the highest potential dollar value. So a lot of people say to me, well, Di, why don't I just start with the ones that are going to save me the most money? If you think that they are relatively easy to remove, then you start with those ones. But if you've given it a 1, I don't recommend you start there, because you need to get yourself into the process. And to get yourself into the process, you need to have some success. And you need to start seeing that success. And human nature says if you bite something off and it's too hard and it just doesn't go well, you don't do it again. So you give up and you say it's too hard. So you start with the ones that have the highest potential dollar value, but are the easiest to remove. So once you've done that waste audit, it might end up looking something like this. Excuse me a second, I'm just going to grab another bottle of water. I've got a little tickle in my throat. Okay, so it might look like this. So if you'll see on this one, we've gone through here and we've said, okay, these are potential costs. We think there's potentially, and it is only an estimate, up to $380,000 worth of waste occurring in our business at the moment. Then you rate it. So we said, okay, the ones, so the red crosses are the rating that we've given. So if you have a look here, there's quite a few on the hard side. But there are a few that are not easy, but they're above average. So anything above a 5, you want to start looking at. So we have a look at the ones that have the highest costs and the highest ease of removal. So we look here at storage. We've said, oh, we've got a problem in waiting and storing stuff and how the costs are associated with that. So we might identify that as one of the first things that we're going to look at. The next one that we'd look at and prioritise would be the travel. So the way we are travelling to clients, to service jobs, the way we are using our freight to actually get goods to it, we think we're potentially wasting some money there. So we'd start focusing on that one. Then if you go to inappropriate processing, you'll see we've got 2 that are rated in 5 in that category, but one of them's worth more in terms of cost saving. So we're simply going to stop using laser for draft copies. So we're not going to print draft copies anymore, or we're going to print them in lesser quality to save us some money in terms of toner and in terms of paper. Then we move down to another one that we've rated really as fairly easy, which is the layout of our office. So there's a lot of wasted time that we have between walking upstairs, downstairs, and the way the staff are seated that may not be appropriate. So we've said they're sort of our 4 really quick, easy wins that we think we can get. So we're going to start with those 4. So once you start with those, once you've identified which ones you want to focus on, then what you do is you need to develop some strategies and action items and plot them on your 1-page action plan that I've given you, which looks like this. So that's this one here. So you look at where the business is now, where you want it to be. You want to remove X dollars of waste, or you want to remove inefficiencies in these areas. And then you'll list out the actions that you need to do. But really importantly on that is to allocate timing and responsibility and monitor it. Because unless you've actually put a timeline on it and you've allocated responsibility to somebody to actually do it, it'll remain just a wish list. So it's really important that you take that next step after the waste audit, pick 3 or 4 you're going to focus on and put them into some sort of one-page plan that you're monitoring and tracking. So the next step is the implementation, which is about that monitoring and tracking. So how do you know if it's working? One of the ways you could look at is let's compare our monthly financial statements. Let's see, what was this cost in March? What was this cost in April? And some might be a longer term thing. So you might need to be thinking of some of the operational impacts that you would expect to be seeing before you can actually see the financial impact of those particular things. So you need to be thinking about, how can I actually track if this is working? And those 6 steps are the basis for a waste audit. And I know it sounds really complicated, but all I would suggest is that you give it a crack. You've got the tools, and I will email you out a copy of the PowerPoints today as well. And just start thinking about it, because what I say to people is, when you start thinking about where inefficiency occurs and thinking about looking for it and putting some costs around it, that mindset change flows on to other things. So it is a really useful exercise, and it's something that I think we are all going to have to focus on in the next sort of 6-month period in particular, just to make sure that we're running our businesses as lean and as efficiently as possible to get us through. And hopefully, if you've got those processes running efficiently and those different stages in your business running efficiently, once we get to the other side, you'll be a lot better prepared to capitalize on those. So that's how to do a waste audit. But when you're thinking about going through this process, one of the things that you can also, if it's a little bit easier for you to do, is to think about, well, how am I using this to actually look at increasing my sales? How can I reduce my cost of sales? And how can I reduce my overhead or my operating expenses? So they are the 3 key profit drivers of any business. And anything we do that impacts positively on one of those will impact positively on your net profit at the end of the year. I'm going to scrap that one for the moment because I think it just confuses people. So do your waste audit, allocate your teams or who's going to be responsible to do what from the action items that you put in your one-page plan, and set in place some strategies or some key performance indicators, I should say, to actually track the success of those action items. Down the track, you want to revisit this on an annual basis, but at least start it. So that are the key components from my perspective. Do you guys have any questions on what we've gone through?
No, I don't.
Gillian, are you good?
Yeah, no, that was really, really good. You know, obviously I don't have physical stock, so, no. However, trying to cost out the effect of, I know there's 2 things that I think are very wasteful here, and that's time waiting for management decisions.
Yes.
And unnecessary meetings.
Yep.
Would that go in?
Absolutely, it would. That would go in.
Which section would that go in? You
would put that in. So waiting for decisions comes in waiting.
Yep.
And I would probably put you could put the unnecessary motions it could fit either in unnecessary motions, the too many meetings,
yep, or
even overproduction. So if you're constantly meeting about the same thing, you're spending too long developing it. So you're overproducing, overcooking something. Yep. So what can you do differently in those meetings to speed up the decision process? And what can you do differently to actually speed up the management access to those management decisions.
Yep. And
they are two key areas.
I'd probably put emails in there too. You know, you've got the to and fro when people just have to have another dig at something.
Yeah.
So you've got, you know, to and the fro, and it's just like, stop it. Like.
Yep. And unfortunately, that sort of thing can come back to culture as well, which is more of the long-term thing, which is harder to fix.
Yeah, I know.
But I know with us, one of the things that we do, which has worked, because we're constantly getting bombarded with information and emails from the government, from the tax office, from clients, from, you know, IT platforms, from all of the different sources that we need to be on top of. So we've actually set up Workplace for Business, which is like Facebook, and we're now moving across to the Teams version. So we can actually have different groups. So, you know, if there's an issue about, you know, Xero, it'll go in this particular group. If there's an issue about, you know, our tax platform, it'll go in this particular group. If there's an issue from the tax office, it'll go in this group. If there's an issue about, you know, government grants that have been announced, it'll go in this group, so that you don't have to be in that email loop of CCing all in larger organisations, so that if you need to know about something from an IT perspective, you go and look it up in that group. You don't have to trawl through your email box, which wastes a lot of time. And you don't have to receive the hundreds and hundreds of emails. So we did it specifically to address the fact that we were getting just too much email traffic.
Yeah, I've actually just started, well, I've got everyone using Teams, working remotely, and I've actually been looking at that too for that reason.
Yeah, Teams is fantastic. I can't speak highly enough of Teams.
Yeah.
It's a really good, it's great.
It was a bit hard getting people used to it though. A couple of the old school guys were like, oh, just email. It's like, no, there's so much more you can do with it. Listen to me.
Yeah. And that's always the case when you're bringing in any new technology. And I think at the moment, one of the things we need to be really mindful is change fatigue. I mean, people are just going through massive upheavals with what's happening, with having to move staff remotely, move staff on. You know, we're all in survival mode. And sometimes I think it makes it harder for people to adapt.
Yeah.
But one of the things we're sort of seeing is in clients as well as our own business, you can really see those new leaders start to emerge on, you know, who's picking things up and running with it, who's got suggestions. It's a great time for those people to step up and shine. That's what we're seeing. But you'll always have the resistors.
No, that was
all
awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, ladies. I hope you found it useful. Please don't hesitate to email me if you've got any queries when you've been through the process and you just want to double check with me on a couple of things. I'm happy to respond to your email or give you a call back. Best of luck with it all, and I will email you a copy of the PowerPoints straight away.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Di.
No problem.